Turning geostrategy in business policy is not easy, I can tell you that. That's a challenge for anyone who teaches a business class. So I'm reminded, since I'm the moderator, I will go first. A colleague of mine who unfortunately could not be here today, Failing One, has come out with a book recently that is making some waves. China Order, Centralia, World Empire, and the nature of Chinese power, in which he argues that what China is aiming for is to restore an international community based on Confucian legalist norms, a China order-dominated ecosystem, particularly in Asia, the reincarnation of the Qin Han through techno-domination. Okay, so that's trying to sort of give a benevolent look to the Chinese goal rather than analyzing it in the Graham Allison manner. I wanted your reaction. I don't know if you know the book, but the book was reviewed in the Financial Times, was reviewed in the Wall Street Journal, in Les Echos de la Presse, and many other economic business publications. It is a geostrategic book. But people understood that there is much more than sheer Chinese domination challenging the US. It's a re-establishment of a natural order that had prevailed in the 16th and prior centuries. At least that's the argument that is made, using the term Centralia. Second point I want to make, and then I'll turn it over to the audience, and you can react to me if you wish. Edward Ludwig, U.S. geostrategic thinker working for the Department of Defense and neoconservative, was written extensively on the nature of war and peace. I'd argued a long time ago, in the 1980s, in the Defense Department, U.S. DoD Defense Department, that China was the threat. At a time when the Clinton camp came into power and really leading the charge into globalization over a period of 8 years. And of course, he's back in business with a different name. Perhaps Peter Navarro is connected in some ideational fashion. What to make of all that? You are pessimistic. You view the system is in disequilibrium. We are really in for a 20, 40-year confrontation. You are indicating, I'm not sure where you are on Huawei, but you're indicating that it's just symptomatic of other things. And you view it as, in terms of la longue durée, the long-term trend, inescapable in terms of those trends. That's the old McIntyre. This was taught in the U.S. Naval War College in the 1870s, 1890s, 1900. The rise of the High Seas Navy, the first U.S. colonial empire with the defeat of Spain, the taking over of the Philippines in South Asia, the taking over of Puerto Rico, and to some extent Cuba. So where are we in all that, and what to make of it? So I'll give you a chance to react, and then we can turn it to the audience. We have 20 minutes left. Who wants to go first? Yeah. I don't know that you need to sit down. I mean, I stood up, but whatever you're more comfortable with.
Yeah. I will only take a minute or two. The primary point that I think I was trying to make with my presentation is the world in 2019 is not the same as it was in 1900, or 1800, or 1600, or 1500. What's happened in the last 70 or 80 years has changed the entire structure of the political system. And therefore, I think it's a mistake to make China into a Soviet Union of 1945, or Germany of 1900, or whatever the case may be. It is accurate that mercantilism was the dominant mechanism of thinking, really up until about 1945 or 1950. But it's less true. China is a mercantilist state in part, but it also has a gigantic form of trade with the rest of the world. Its current account is now close to zero. There is no longer a giant surplus by the Chinese. And the Chinese behave in ways that don't sound mercantilistic at all. Why is it that almost 80% of the high-tech exports of China are produced by Western firms operating in China and operating through global supply chains and global knowledge networks? That makes for a different kind of world, and I think it's a mistake for Graham Allison and the rest of us to say Let's go back and talk to Thucydides. Let's even go back and talk to George Kennan, because those people were operating in a different global system. The system today needs new kinds of thinking and new kinds of understanding and some recognition of what's going on. So, also arguing that the Chinese are engaged in a revivification of their policies of 1,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago, it strikes me as a mistake.
Thank you. My response would be those who ignore history are bound to repeat it, but different times, different contexts, different mindsets. So basically you're telling us, don't go back to these archaic frames of reference. Try and come up with a new way of analyzing the modern world.
Understand the changes that have taken place.
Yeah. Laurent, you were very much bound by those systems.
Yeah, my answer would be very, very simple on the one, is that we're not going to go back in time. Japan, as a challenger, was a mercantilist country.
Yeah.
They were exactly following the same rules as the British or the Germans or the American in the past. So we are just 30 years ago, and China is the heirs of Japan. They have been following what Japan has been doing, what Taiwan has been doing, what Singapore has been doing. We're just in the present, absolutely in the present. So I can only disagree with my colleague.
Basically, you stand apart on that. Will you be sort of divided? Will you be King Solomon and splitting the baby?
I actually shared, in many ways, the view of Dr. Larson in the sense that you look at the international system, you have a system that, yes, was created by the United States in terms of the rules and institutions that are governing the system, but the world has changed. The tides have turned. China is the world's largest economy, if you look at it on a PPP basis. India is actually coming behind the United States and has already displaced Japan. So we're going back to the world of, well, in terms of economic power, well, up to 1800s and so on. But from the Chinese perspective, I think in order to diffuse the tensions and to make sure that we have more cooperation rather than competition, it has to be an acknowledgement on the part of the West, or specifically the United States, that they have to share the stage, because you can't necessarily expect a rising power to abide by the rules of an existing power, especially if that power is gradually weakening. And I think the effects of that we have seen if the U.S. is not willing to adjust or accommodate or co-opt, whatever word one might use, China into the existing international system. China doesn't want to change the international system, but if it doesn't get a seat at the table that's commensurate with its new found influence and power, it builds different institutions. Or if it focuses on the BRI to challenge the U.S. view, whether it builds institutions like the AIIB or the New Development Bank to challenge the World Bank and the IMF and the hold that they have had on international finance. I think there's a lot at stake in terms of the perceptions and the misperceptions, and the prevailing narrative that I see as a political scientist from people like, and I'm not a big fan of Peter Navarro by any means, it is an extreme distortion of facts. It's just that we are more comfortable with where we are right now. We like the status quo. Well, the status quo has to change.
There's much more than Peter Navarro.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
There's a tradition in the defense establishment of which Ludwig, who's still alive and well, was one of the first expression of that in the 1980s, in terms of viewing China as a threat to basically established power, really coming out of World War II with 50% of manufacturing capability. Now, an economic historian, most of you may know him, is deceased Dutch, said that looking at the history of the world economy, China in the 16th century, it's an estimate, amounted to about 25% of world economic flows. And that in terms of its growth path, it will replicate that because it's its equilibrium, its natural equilibrium. Again, we are going back to historical frameworks, and if you break loose from history, you might challenge that assumption and say, well, who cares what China was in the 16th century?
No, I wouldn't say that.
Okay, you haven't gone that far.
But I would say there's a difference.
Okay. So, if China doesn't rest in terms of its natural growth path until it reaches 25% of the global world GDP, can we then expect a new Bretton Woods can we then expect international regime institutions to move from what is essentially the United States and in parts of Switzerland to Asia? Question. Will China be able to be the regime stabilizer, the provider of institutions? Because those institutions are fraying at the seams as we speak right now. Whether it's even the IMF coming under new leadership by a Bulgarian economist, or the World Bank being under challenge in terms of its settlement capability by the Trump administration. What do you say? Is China going to be the benevolent power capable of stabilizing the world economy and moving us away from the mercantilist frame of mind? Perhaps we should turn to you because you had a lot of insight this morning, Ilan.
First of all, I say I'm quite enjoying it's a very different framework. The geopolitical framework is different. I definitely agree with the first speaker in the sense that it's true that one should know about history, and that, in fact, I made the same argument. One should know the history because it allows you to understand where you are now.
Yeah.
But it's also true that history does not necessarily repeat itself. That's a problem. Now, I also think that we have some control on our destiny, and so the idea of determinism is certain. Even if it was true, I would argue we should not believe it.
Actually, I would like to say something about that. Is that if we look at the situation of Germany versus the British Empire, just before the First World War, there was a very strong interconnection. And some people, economy, diplomatic, etc. The royal family were the same stuff, all the same, and were having holidays together. So nobody thought that it was possible that the World War would happen. And I think that this reference that we found in books like Kissinger was talking about that, Clark was talking about that. I think it's quite important because this interaction, I'm not saying, I support the idea of Mr. Lesson. And I find that we should think that way. But at the same time we are dealing with a situation where this interaction may not be enough. And history is telling us that. We have to be careful about that. So that was my first remark. Maybe I have a second one. The second one is about the new international monetary order. We tried to shift it in 2010-11 with the G20 agenda, which was a reform of the international monetary system, meaning putting on the same foot America, the US dollar, the euro, the Chinese yuan, Japanese yen, etc. It was a complete failure and nothing get out of it. And I would just like to add one point, I'm European. And sometimes to have friends like America, it's a bit difficult.
Can I just add
yes, sir.
Thing which I forgot to say? I do also believe there are some structures, and I'm talking now more about economics,
yes,
that create situations. So, for example, I think that with respect to right now this race, the race which will lead us to sort of a minimax position.
yeah.
It's a structural situation where we have to look at the nature of the technology and the fact that network economies lead to the large win zone.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when you have this kind of situation, all what you can hope that people, and I think that was my message in some ways, that people or countries can basically bypass incentives and pressures and come to the cooperative solution.
In-game theory, for sure.
Yeah.
But
And we
so
should pray for it.
yeah, picking up on your point, if I may, and then you mentioned two things that really struck me that are very micro in a way. 5G is a standards game, okay? Whereas, and then therefore there's a punctuated equilibrium, an interesting concept which can be translated in economics thinking. And then artificial intelligence is a continuous process of techno-innovation and therefore competition. But yet the Trump administration is placing all of its pawns on the chessboard with 5G. Is it a mistaken analysis? Peter Navarro and Scopes.
My quick answer to that was 5G is a more immediate threat because of Huawei's dominance in the game.
Yes.
And second, AI is the Trump administration doesn't know what to do about AI because American fiscal policy is completely paralyzed by the fact that the only thing we can spend money on is giving tax relief to rich people. We give away trillions of dollars, but we cannot make an investment in our own infrastructure or in our own innovation capabilities. And as long as we are going to have that kind of fiscal policy, then we're not going to have a policy on AI or anything else like that.
It's true. We were comparing smart cities technologies, the case of China versus the United States, and most smart cities technologies, of course, is being implemented in China. So we're going to turn it over to you in the back. I think you raised your hand, and then William, and then you. Okay, so we'll start with you.
I have one question to Laurent and to Tom. So when we look into the past or into history, I think we might be in danger that we talk about different things. What we talk about now is technology, or growth comes from technology, from interconnectivity, from the internet. And this is based that we have this on standardization. And standardization means that we have to come to a common standard, right? So different countries need to negotiate what is the future standard. And if we talk now about trade wars or geopolitics, probably we'll not come to a common standard. Think about the internet. The internet without the standard of www, there would be nothing. So that means there's no information sharing. And when we look into the past, we talk about products, we talk about commodities, we talk about gold and silver and so on. But the assets in the future is information and connectivity. So I think it is, or that's my question to both of you, is it not a mistake to look into the past and to try to explain the future and not realizing that we are talking about different animals, so to say. It's not about commodities, it's about information, it's not about product, it's about,
this new currency that is essentially information technology communication comes out of the defense, comes out of military innovation.
Yeah,
we know that at Georgia Tech. We have $1 billion fund, research funded by the Department of Defense,
but
which has commercial applications.
But my point is,
what I'm saying is that geostrategy is never very far.
That's true, but we have different common ground what we discuss about. That is my point. That's the question. Is that the case, or are we still talking about the same? Is it not totally different? And I think, Tom, you said it is different. What we should not look into the past, but we should have new strategies or something like this. So that's
new frameworks of analysis.
Yeah, and Milan, that's your point.
In the remaining time, we should give William and you, sir, a chance to William. And then we're coming to the end at 12:15. I recall. Yeah.
It's very interesting to hear kind of American point of view, European point of view, and I would like to at least present some sort of Chinese point of view. And I think that this type of historical perspective is very important. First point of view is a kind of mixture of nation strategy, geopolitical strategy, plus economic incentives, right? Without talking about those large companies, it's an interaction between the large companies with the country's interests. First of all. And the second is talking about the rationality and the irrationality. So from the rational calculation, that's what you said, that we try to avoid that. And unfortunately, that happened by finishing the war to destroy and then to reconstruct. Because it's a gambling, it's a calculation, it's a financial calculation as well. So the war in the past
we can see that it's a rational choice. Despite we try to avoid that, but it happened. Third point that I want to say that whether it will duplicate again in the past or not.
Yeah, that is a question.
From the Chinese perspective, something which is not common is a cultural matter. Again, if you take a look on in the past, when you're talking about the Chinese expansion, in fact, it was not Chinese, it was Mongolian. So it was not a Chinese culture, it's talking about the Han, to represent a very aggressive expansion approach, aggressive approach of seizing the powers. And as you mentioned that, as soon as what I feel in the Chinese culture in the past, thousands of years, as soon as we receive the pressure, we try to become protection instead of expansion. Even without talking about the current situation in China, you see that how the central government is significantly reinforced the power. It's a reaction towards the higher pressure from the external part. So that is the difference what I see compared to the Europeans or to the Americans. It's more the culture to expand to the overseas, try to access the resources, etc. So maybe this is also a kind of important turning point to change the historical landscape, to say that is why Xi Jinping is talking about win-win. It's rooted to the Chinese culture, whatever you call it, the Taoism or Buddhism or Chinese cultures, to looking for the harmony, looking for a win-win situation. But it is true that the perception from the West is not the same. We are not on the same page. So it's a kind of cultural conflicts. We are not perceived the same on the same page, despite that the Chinese or the Oriental culture try to look for the harmony. So that is the significant difference compared to what has happened in the past, because of domination by the West and economic expansion, re-emergence of the Chinese power. So,
but even with the sharing of Asian values across North Asia,
it's more inclusive.
There's plenty of conflict in North Asia, built in the rising nationalism of different states, nation states in North Asia. Japan, Korea, China. One last question, and then we will call it a day. Have lunch, I think.
I haven't gotten to Grand Mal. First of all, it was a wonderful discussion. This is really wondering what's going to happen in China is really important at this point. The Graham Allison book, one weakness is that all of the wars he talks about are in Europe. So, following on your point, one of the things that I think we need to do is to include Asian patterns. China was the largest economy in the world, making 20, 30% roughly. We don't know exactly, but they were, and that is something that is achieved. It's very numerical. We've worked on how the Chinese got 4 trillion. They got 4 trillion through a whole series of things like licensing imports and exports. That's a really simple way to have a surplus. You say we're going to have a certain number of imports, a certain number of exports. They've done that for years. Their currency was even cheaper for a while. They basically depreciated 60% within a year, I think, in 2000. Yeah, and so they did the mercantile. It's very clear. But at the same time, they have, so for an BRI and AIIB are both possible because of this now 3 trillion surplus. But it's so the question, I guess, is how do they, when they develop that surplus, which they have, will that surplus translate to both military, economic power for sure, military power, we'll see. But I think including Asian military history would certainly be. Yes. We talk about Swinsley, everybody says, oh, Swinsley. Well, what are the implications of historical Chinese military power? As you say, it was the Mongols in Japan that did it, not the Hans.
Well, Henderson does miss the Japan-China confrontation, which of course the US was on the forefront of that. In any event, I did have a question for you. You said the Chinese currency, the renminbi yuan, is overvalued by 40%. No, excuse me, of course, undervalued by 30%. I'm curious to hear why you claim that, because it's a big topic with US
Balance sheet
Treasury
of the PBOC. Balance sheet of the PBOC.
Okay,
There was so much yuan created, which is another way to deal with undervaluation.
Okay, so that's your
That they had to withdraw almost 2/3 of the money created in the last 20 years.
And therefore,
That's the evidence of the undervaluation.
And
Otherwise, they would have get inflation, even hyperinflation. So the answer is that it's in the balance sheet of the PBOC, not in the big markets.
okay, so a round of applause for our presenters.